Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week, ending the 16th of August, 2024. The weather is still distinctly un-August-like where I am. Seems to be a little bit more August-like where you are, Sarah. You're still on holidays. How are you?
I'm good. Roasting 37 degrees. Just the way I like it.
Stop. I mean,
Some
that's
people
actually
hate it.
too hot.
No,
Yeah,
it's
I
not.
hate that. That's too hot now. No,
I like to be well done.
No. Yeah, that's fair. I'm much more a medium rare guy myself, I have to say. All right. Well, you're not missing. I was going to say you shouldn't be missing a whole lot because it's August and all the politicians are on holidays and the news has gone quiet. And we've also, Sky News did a breaking news story with the full banner, yellow banner saying "breaking news" with updates to come about a celebrity breakup, which we'll talk about later on. So to some extent, it is silly season, but there's actually been a lot of substantive news this week, starting with a report by Sunday Business Post last Sunday that the Irish government is spending an additional €30 billion every year compared to when it came into power. It's increased spending by a substantial amount, almost 50% in its 5 years in office. That's recurring spending. That's what we're spending every single year. And the Sunday Business Post was asking, I think, a very reasonable question, which is, how on earth is that sustainable? And why are we not talking about it more? And I think it's an interesting conversation. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas as to why it is that the government's going to spend all this extra money and nobody's really having a conversation about it, apart from you and me in the Sunday Business Post.
Well, first of all, in the standard Irish way, there doesn't seem to be any correlation in improvement in services associated with that uptick in spending. So as far as I'm concerned, like pressing things that one would expect might benefit from money, like health, education, transport, infrastructure, like whatever, none of that seems to have changed by 50% or even 5%, really, if you ask me. So I'd be keen to see a deeper breakdown into exactly what that's related to or where it's going. We know that the government increased the budget year on year for the health service, just like it's kind of confetti, and we don't get any improvement in the service because it really, there's a very strong argument to be made that the problems in the health service are actually nothing to do with money and actually to do with a lot of other things. But I think that we don't have those kind of conversations because that's a symptom of the fact that we don't have hard conversations about a lot of things in Ireland these days. I was speaking to somebody just yesterday, actually, an American guy. He's an old mentor of mine. He's written this book, and we were having a Zoom chat, and he was asking me about politics, and I was saying, well, a lot of the time it feels like the people who, if you take the essence of what a politician should be a thinker, is obviously a legislator, is somebody who should have ideas, is somebody who should have causes that they fight for, that they feel passionate about. And for me at the moment, it feels like the people who have all of those characteristics the most are actually tending to be the people who are on the outside of politics completely, like people who are protesting in their communities, like people who are angry about this or running campaigns for that whatever. So I think that what you're talking about there is a demonstration of the fact that there's a breakdown in the way we do politics in Ireland in general. And that's present in our politicians and in our media. And we just don't have a media, with some exceptions that we've discussed before. But by and large, we don't have a media that really challenge the politicians about this kind of stuff. Like that, just if that figure was presented to us 10 or 15 years ago, Vincent Browne or any number of other journalists would have had questions about that. There would have been articles about it. It wouldn't have even gotten to that because that's a creep. That wasn't an overnight number. And there would have been conversations about it. And the problem is we don't have that kind of media. We don't have that kind of political culture anymore. And it's a really, really big problem. I mean, next year it'll be another 100, so what? It's like it's monopoly money. But it's our money and we're not getting the services back. And no one is arguing that. Like, what about even Sinn Féin? Why are Sinn Féin not coming out about this? They're supposed to be our opposition. Nothing. We get nothing.
To spend more.
Yeah.
They would spend more. Now, I think you make an interesting point about journalism, and it tallies into a point I often think about Irish journalism, which is there's an inability to draw lines between stories. So they'll always give you the one story. So they will give you, for example, I'm just thinking of a couple of stories this week. There is a shortage of 1,000 teachers in Ireland going into the new school term. Don't have 1,000 teachers. The government is spending 30 billion a year more in taxpayer money every year just to stand still. And there's no line drawn between those two stories. They're never mentioned in the same breath. Well, it seems to me to be an obvious connection. I mean, if you're spending all this extra money and at the same time you've got a teacher shortage, that poses a question to me as well. What are you spending the money on? And are you spending it effectively? And clearly you're not. I mean, clearly if you're increasing the education budget by $1 billion or so a year, and they're all running over budgets as well, by the way, that money is going in ways that are not actually advancing the cause of education in the country. And we can see that because you can see, and I'm using education as an example, I could do this for any one of about 12 of the 15 government departments. But in education, for example, this week, there is an ongoing plan to introduce, we're told in the budget, free books for secondary school students. So up to Leaving Cert, all your school books will be free. Now, that's a very laudable scheme, but it also has downsides. Lots of local booksellers, for example, are saying, well, this is going to put us out of business. It's going to save parents some money. It's going to put booksellers out of business. But is it actually going to solve any of the structural problems in education, like the fact that we don't have any teachers, the fact that classrooms are overcrowded? No, it's not. It's a simple pre-election bribe. We're going to give people something for free that's going to cost us a load of money, isn't actually going to improve the quality of education for everybody, but yay for us, we gave you something free. And I think that speaks to not only a kind of a sickness in the body politic, but a kind of a sickness in the electorate, that we don't stop and ask these questions that are more substantive than just what are you giving me? And I think when you're spending 30 billion a year, a lot of that is down to voters wanting stuff. So you look at health, for example, as this business of, well, let's constantly extend the age at which kids get free GP care. I know that's probably great news for you. You've got 3 young kids. But is it actually improving the quality of the health service, or is it just placing more strain on GPs' offices? So all this money that's being spent, in some cases, is actually making the problem worse. And at the same time, it's all money we have to pay for. So, but I just don't think we have a media that has any interest in drawing these lines. And more to the point, you and I were both talking to somebody this week who knows who he is, who is making the point that he thinks the quality of candidates being selected by some of the political parties, he won't name them, for this general election is lower than it has ever been. And I think a lot of this is to do with the sheer caliber of politicians who, like the media, are incapable of drawing lines between we spend money, we get results. Maybe that's too harsh.
But also that and so, but the training of politicians now, and this is what I was talking to my friend in the States about yesterday, is about my entire nervous system as a politician is orchestrated, or is designed to avoid being damaged by hard questions. So every conversation is my training, and people who come into politics now, they're trained, best media training in the world. They get their notes from their press office, and then they're trained to, whatever you do, don't get into a hard conversations. And I saw, for example, this week, like you talk about the GP thing. I'm very lucky. My kids are very rarely sick, and I also have, I've said before, people in my life who are doctors that I can kind of get advice from, and so I don't need to bring my kids to the doctor very much. But there are people out there whose kids get sick a lot, and I'm sure the GP system, free GP care, helps them tremendously. There's also a lot of people out there, and I know because I have some friends who are GPs, who utterly abuse it and bring their kids to the GP for no reason other than nonsense, and that clogs up GP clinics. But I saw this week an announcement being made about HRT, treatments for women becoming free or whatever. But like, I'm 41, okay, so I can tell you, I know, and I checked this, that most of the time, John, the HRT patches and all of the stuff associated with HRT is like not any money. So it's all like fanfare. Like, I think a HRT patches I checked are €10, €12, something like that for a month. Like, it's all this fanfare. Well, look what we're doing for women. We're doing this and we're doing that. But no one ever does anything about childcare. No one ever does anything about creches. No one ever does anything about the things that actually really matter. I saw a thread this week on Twitter by Nick Delahanty, brilliant, about tax individualization and how that has affected the family, and how when I've stayed home, I can't give my tax credits to my husband. Even though I'm staying home, my tax credits evaporate into thin air. There's a way to help people. There's a way to help women. There's a way to help families. I've said before on the podcast that when I decided to stay home when I had my kids, all of my girlfriends, we went on a night away, and I was pregnant with my second child, and they said, what are you going to do about work? And I said, I'm not going to go back to work for the foreseeable. I'm going to just stay at home and have my kids. And I was expecting, because we all went to Smurfit Business School together, a little bit of kind of like them being like, oh, like really? And every single one of them was like, I'm so jealous, the dream. Now, I'm not saying all women, but there's nothing for those women. There's no tax incentive for them to do that. So they all have to keep on working, and some of them don't want to. So do something that actually will have a tangible benefit to women. HRT, free patches, big deal. But it's presented like it was the same with, the state will provide one round of IVF for people who are struggling to get pregnant. Okay, couple of things. First of all, you'll wait so long for it, probably won't even benefit you. Second of all, the criteria to get it was pretty harsh. Third of all, I know, because I have lots of friends who've gone for IVF, that a huge amount of women in Ireland are leaving Ireland to get IVF abroad, because Ireland is, and I've heard this from the horse's mouth, has a bad reputation in Europe for our success levels in terms of IVF, one of the poorest. So big deal again. Give tax incentives for people to work. Help women to have children younger. No. But like, here's some HRT patches, girls, because we're going to save you that €12 a month. Big feckin' deal.
It's funny you say that, because people who've been reading the stuff I've been writing this week, and I appreciate that's not everyone who watches or listens to this podcast. Shame on you all for not taking the time out of your day to read my thoughts every, twice a day, 5 days a week. But people who have been doing that, heroes that they are, will have observed a trend in my writing this week, where I've been writing with exactly what you're talking about, which is the government is incapable, fundamentally and structurally incapable, of solving the big problems in this country. Can't solve housing. It can't fix the migration crisis. It can't stop the trolley crisis in health. It can't replace those 1,000 teachers who are missing from the education system. It can't get class sizes down. Can't get more Gardaí on the streets. It can't tackle crime. It can't build more prisons. It can't get drugs out of prisons, which is something we can talk about later on. All big problems that the government can't fix. So what does it do instead? It invents problems that it thinks it can solve, and then presents those as big problems. And we've got great examples of this week, right across the board. So we had the Minister for Higher Education, Patrick O'Donovan, announcing that the government was finally going to tackle the scourge, Sarah, of single-sex schools. Because they're the problem, because apparently they're producing misogynistic men who need apparently to be exposed to women at a young age to stop becoming monsters. We had Simon Harris announcing he was going to call
It's important to remember that we're only talking about Irish men there. We're only talking about like Irish men.
Oh, young Irish men, yeah.
Young Irish men are the only ones.
Simon Harris, he announced he was going to call a cabinet summit, Sarah. A cabinet summit at which he was going to discuss the sanctions that the state might be able to take on that villain Elon Musk. Now, these are not big problems in the context of what average Irish people are facing. The average Irish person is not lying awake at night worrying that their school is single sex or that Elon Musk has too much power on the internet. These are what you might call luxury level beliefs and luxury level problems. But the average person who has real problems, those problems can't be solved. So the government is incentivized to invent problems all the time that it thinks it can solve. So you had articles in newspapers this week, now admittedly not from politicians, about things like banning sunbeds, banning advertising for soft drinks. These are all issues we can talk about. But they're fundamentally not big problems, and the government can't solve them. What all it can do is throw money at people to try and buy votes, and invent social and cultural issues that it thinks it can address. It is, and once you start seeing that, I implore you, if you're watching or listening, once you start seeing and realizing this, you'll never look at them the same way again, because you'll realize that it is all an ongoing charade, a performance, a school play, a degree of, play acting at politics. I mean, you rise to become the Taoiseach of the country or a cabinet minister. You think you're going to do something meaningful. No, you're not. You're going to complain in the newspapers about single-sex schools and consider whether we should ban sunbeds. It's a joke.
I mean, yeah. And I'd love to say that I think it's because it's like August and there's nothing else doing, but it's not. It's don't bite off more than you can chew. There's an election coming up. Let's make it look like we're, something needs to be done. Here's something. There, we did something. And let's just do that on repeat and make it look like we're busy fools. But none of the like I said, as a 41-year-old woman with 3 children, none of the the pinch points in my life in terms of, having 3 children have ever are being addressed by anything. Like I've said it before about stuff like my daughter is going to be starting Montessori. She doesn't qualify for the ECI because her birthday is 2 months into the wrong year. So I have to pay for that. This kind of garbage. Like they're real problems. I know a number of people who've fallen into that trap. My second child was born in January, 11 days too late. And then I have to pay €1,000 a month for a year because he didn't qualify for ECI that year. Like these are like problems that people actually face. I don't care about, sunbeds. The sunbed conversation has been going on my whole adult life. If like, can we all just agree? We understand sunbeds are really bad for you. Ban them, don't ban them. Stop talking about it. It's boring.
Well, I would have thought being in a sunbed was boring, to be honest with you. I've never been in one. I never shall be in one. But I've seen people it's like going into a coffin. I don't understand what you're supposed to do. Mind you, I have to say, I'm one of the people, when you're on holidays and you see these women, and you may be one of these by the sound of your praising of the 37-degree heat, who just lie on the beach all day with a bikini on or parts of it off. They just lie there in the sun getting slowly cooked. I'm like, you're not bored to tears.
I like a bit of a tan, but I wouldn't lie out like that now. But I've never been in a sunbed. And when I was growing up, and I've heard other Irish people say that they're familiar with this, but in loads of working class communities, it was really common for some L1 to have a sunbed in her house, and all the L1s would go in and use it. And I saw this. They'd be getting in this thing and sunbedding themselves, whatever. But I thought that we'd kind of evolve past that. But some adults still like to use sunbeds, and frankly, good luck to them.
I actually saw a sunbed being installed into a house last year. I was in the local town that is the one nearest to me. I was driving into it, and it was a little terraced house on the way in. And there was a lady, and I'd say she was at the youngest she was in her 60s. She may have been older than that. And there was this enormous sunbed coming off the back of a lorry into a very small house. Now, I mean, this thing was it would take up a whole bedroom, and they couldn't fit it in the door. It was actually, I was stuck in traffic watching it, kind of getting amused. So that still does go on. But yeah, and do you know what?
But
more
it's
power
not.
to her. Did I just say that woman probably saved up a lot of money and was really looking forward, really excited and delighted to get that in? And why shouldn't she have it? Why shouldn't she have it? She probably worked her whole life. She probably raised some kids. She's entitled to a luxury if she wants it. And this idea that it should be banned is just, anyway, you can talk more
But
about
it's
it.
just also it's not that deep. The sunbed thing, okay, fine, but it shouldn't be on the agenda for a serious political country. And it's on the
No, it
agenda
shouldn't.
regularly, I think, in Ireland. It comes up every couple of years. You know what I mean? And meanwhile, there's loads of other pressing issues that could be discussed. But no, let's have another conversation about sunbeds. Let's not. Let's have a hard conversation about who we are or what we want to be, or, how we want to manage incentivizing people to have more children. Or let's dig up the children's hospital. Let's throw that out on the stoop and see if the cat licks it up. Anything hard. God forbid.
But it comes back to the second aspect of what I was talking about a few moments ago, which is the other pillar. So pillar one is we can't solve hard problems, so we'll invent small problems to solve. But pillar two is that all the problems we'll invent will not actually be problems with the country or the way the country is being run. They'll be problems with you, the public. So pillar one is we can't fix the health service, but we can ban sunbeds. Pillar two is you're the problem. You're actually causing the health problem because you're using sunbeds and you're drinking too much Diet Coke and you're not exercising enough, and get up off your lazy arses and do something, because you're actually ruining the country. It's not the politicians. We're doing nothing wrong. It is you who are at home. You drink too much, eat too much, you watch too much porn, you watch too little of RTE news, and you're reading too much misinformation. And we would like to fix you. We would like to fix the curriculums in schools so that you don't develop these problems in youth. We, as the politicians in the governing class, would very much like to have an entirely different, more compliant and better behaved electorate. That is pillar two. into which all these things come, and it ties into. And I want to talk a little bit more, Sarah, if you don't mind, about this business of single-sex schools, because I mean, I think we both agree it's not a problem. But let's talk about why it's not a problem, because I mean, Patrick O'Donovan, who is the Minister for Higher Education, when he was arguing this and advocating, and we touched on this a minute ago, but he said that he thought that it was important, in order to prevent kind of violence against women and misogyny in Irish society, that we should have more co-educational schools. Now, I think when you say something like that, you have a duty to provide some evidence for it, because you're basically saying that young men, if they're not exposed to women or girls at a young age, will turn into wife-beating, misogynist, potential rapist maniacs. Like, if that was said about any other group of people in society, that implication was leveled, there'd be war. And as somebody who went to two single-sex schools, two very good single-sex schools, as it happens, it's not that I was insulted, but I was just appalled that not only would he say these things, but that the newspaper in which he said them would run them without querying a single thing he said.
But also, nobody
Did you go to a single-sex school?
Yes. Mine was kind of unusual in the sense that my secondary school, I went to Closhescon, it's on the N11 in Stillorgan, and you're single sex up until some of your chosen leaving cert subjects, and then you're mixed in together with the boys. So there might be only one geography teacher, and then so I did geography, you'd be mixed there. So there's a little bit of mixing. But I think that, first of all, as a mother of two sons, I find that, offensive and offensive on behalf of all of the, good men that I know, which are in the majority. But also, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, because I'm a woman, I can, that there's never any conversation about what the implications or what the bad behaviours associated with women being left to their own devices are. So I'm going to say that women in women's school, girls only after a certain age, is not for the faint-hearted. Girls are horrible to each other. In many cases, the psychological dismantling of your entire self-esteem that can go on with girls is horrific and life-scarring for many women that I know. And nearly every friend that I know, will laugh now about the thing that girls did to you or said to you in school or in some kind of female-only environment that scarred you for life. And I think that girls behave better when there's men around. But no one ever talks about the negative associated behaviours of women left to their own devices. It's always the men. And I think it's another privilege that women get. Women just get a free pass. And, no one calls us out on how we might be badly behaved when we're left to our own devices. But let's go for the men again, because Irish men, once again, ring your uncles, ring your cousins, ring your brother and ask them not to beat up women and be abusive to women all the time. But we never have hard conversations about other men from other countries and that they might do that. No, you're not allowed to say that. You're only allowed to talk about the Irish men. And sure, we're breeding them in schools and they're just beating up women and they're awful. And I'm not having it. It's not right.
It's
not accurate. It's not accurate. It's not based on any fact. There's no study. Like, there's studies that show, when we have a conversation about family, there's studies that have been done that show that boys do very well out of having a father, right? Out of that there's literal studies you can point to. Where is the study in Ireland that shows that Irish men who come from single-sex schools are more likely to beat, hurt, abuse, or have any negative behaviours towards women than men who went, show me the study and I'll eat this laptop.
I hope for your sake there's no such. There isn't one. But it's funny you said something, because we have the same view, but from slightly different perspectives. The thing you said about single-sex schools for girls, because I was thinking about this as I'm not the father of any children, but if I was the father of daughters, I'd actually be really pissed off with what the minister said, because he seemed to be suggesting as well that, let's take it purely for the sake of argument that he's correct and that young men do need to be civilized. Well, why is it my daughter's job to do that? If you take that argument to its logical extension, it is that the daughters of the country are to be shepherded in to kind of like be training women for the boys. Like that's where you're taking the logic there, and I think that's deeply offensive. Look, as I said in a piece I wrote about this, I think there are loads of reasons why people might prefer single sex or mixed sex education, and they should have the choice. I think there are parents out there who might feel, for example, and then maybe go ahead.
My children, myself, my brother and sister pretty much went to different schools. My parents took my brother out of the boys' school next to mine at a certain point because he wasn't thriving or whatever. My sister went to a different school from me. It's up to the parents. Some girls will do better in one school. Like I have my boys down and their names down in one school that they probably won't go to because it's a local school, whatever. You do it on a case by case basis, but there's no, there's no, again, it comes back to this thing that the state kind of think that they know better about schooling my kids than I do. If I think my boys will do better by being around girls, I'll decide that, not you. I'll decide. And if I think my daughter shouldn't be, as you say, put in there as a buffer to train your son not to do whatever, well, I'll decide. So again, it comes back to your point, which is that you're all fat, stupid, bad parents who are eating and watching too much of this and will tell you how to be better human beings. No thanks. No thanks. Stay in your lane and try and figure out some of the real problems which you're incapable of doing, but don't tell me how to educate my kids or how to decide about the education of my kids, because you're really overreaching.
It's funny because there are, as I mentioned, real problems in Irish society. Like this business of Portlaoise prison this week, to move the conversation on a little bit. So we had 12 prisoners in that prison overdose with an unknown substance, but we can widely be relatively certain it was an illegal drug of some sort or description. And then we had the prison officers come out and say this is because of prison overcrowding. Now, you and I have discussed, I think, prison overcrowding on this podcast before, and we've made the point that, the state just doesn't want to build prisons. It's too hard. Yeah. We'd have to get planning permission somewhere. No one wants a prison beside them. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why this. Also, we look like meanies putting more people in prison. Yeah, hard conversation, hard thing to do, so they just don't do it. But equally then, the prison officers, who I think have a legitimate complaint on the prison spaces thing, suggesting that the drug overdose is a result of overcrowding seems to me to miss the point that the drug overdose is primarily the result of all these drugs getting into prisons. And this is just another thing that the state either doesn't want to stop, thinks is too hard to stop, doesn't really care what happens. And it just strikes me as the kind of thing that a competent government could fix if it wanted to. But we have, Conor Fitzgerald, I often mention on this podcast as somebody who's an excellent writer, wrote a piece during this week, I think this week or last week, in which he said, look, they don't want to, which is an explanation. The fact is that there are lots of things the government could do, just doesn't want to. And I think solving that problem is one such problem. It strikes me this is just something that nothing is going to be done about. It's just something we're aware of. It's a problem. It's going to persist being a problem. And there are people who end up in prison, and we should say this, there are people who end up in prison who, they may deserve to be there. Maybe they're there for a year or two. But it's not a rehabilitatory experience. There are people who could come good and have normal lives, but a lot of times they go into prison, they develop drug habits in prison, or they learn criminal skills in prison, or they fall in with a bad crowd in prison. And all these people who advocate for a liberal justice policy, which is, rehabilitate people, prisons should be a part of that. And in Ireland, they're not, as I think Portlaoise evidence this week. Or do you think I'm being too harsh?
No, I don't think you're being too harsh. I think, again, it's kind of like if you replace drugs with passports and replace prisons with airlines, it's just another way of changing the entire conversation to be like the government will be blaming the airlines about people destroying their passports at Dublin Airport, blaming overcrowding on drugs. How did drugs get into a prison? So,
there's only three ways.
Seems
right?
to be
there's
a good place to start.
Yeah, there's only three ways. Either they're smuggled in by visitors, which means the security isn't being detected. They're being thrown over the wall, which strikes me as the least efficient way if you wanted to get drugs into a prison, because who knows who's on the other side, and you've got to time it perfectly and so on. Or option three, you have the fact that in Britain last year, 25 prison officers were arrested and convicted and charged with bringing drugs into prison. And there is at least one case of that in Mountjoy Prison this year, where somebody has been arrested, a prison officer, for having drugs in the jacket. Now, that's not to say that is anything more than a minority of prison officers, but it's clearly something that's happening. And again, I wrote about this week, but I think the point is worth making. A couple of years ago, I was speaking to a prison officer about this very issue. This is a couple of years ago, long before it happened in Portation. And I said, like, how have you got so many drugs in prisons? And he said, well, look, it's easier. It's easier not to deal with it because in many cases, if you've got prisoners in an overcrowded wing or doped up off their heads, they're easier to manage than if you had those same prisoners next week who were craving a hit of something and couldn't get it because we'd cracked down on it. They'd become much harder to manage. So there's a collective action problem in that nobody really wants to deal with the consequences of taking a load of people in prison off drugs or denying them access to it. So it blind eyes. This person intimated to me may be being turned in at least some instances. So I think those are all problems that, nobody wants to talk about openly or acknowledge. Maybe. I could be wrong. If you're a politician out there and you want to talk about it openly and acknowledge, get in touch. But I haven't seen anyone talk about it openly or acknowledge it.
No, because like I said, the end route of that conversation is if you follow the line of conversation, it ends with build more prisons, invest more money, have, better security, more staff, money. And there's no will to do that. There's no government that wants to have the hard conversation about the fact that our population has grown. We need more prison spaces. No. So, we'll just move on. Go back to sunbeds.
Yeah, well, money isn't the problem. I mean, we established at the beginning of this podcast that money isn't the problem. We're spending 30 billion. That's 10 children's hospitals every year more than we were 5 years ago. If no government in the history of the state, I don't know if we put this into context at the time, but no government in the history of the state has expanded spending by this amount over this sustained period. And the implications of that, by the way, are obviously can't continue forever. There will have to come a halt to the spending. And it's not that a bill will have to be paid, but if God forbid, if the corporate tax revenues were to go down, then bills will start having to be paid at that stage. And no one's talking about it. So it's not that they don't want to spend money, it's that they don't want to spend money on this. Because nobody wants to be the politician who builds prisons, because that's like something a horrible right-wing Tory would do in the UK, build more prisons, lock people up. They would much more like to spend that money on NGOs and charities who help people with their drug problems, because they think that will reduce crime, when in fact it doesn't. And we know it doesn't because they've been doing it for 30 years and crime is not meaningfully reducing. So there's all that. Anyway, you mentioned there that the airlines are to be fined for this passport business at Dublin Airport. I mean, when was the last time you came inbound through Dublin Airport?
Recently enough, I went to Spain in April or something.
I came in through it there in I came back on a Ryanair flight from Krakow, where I was in Ukraine. Regular listeners and watchers might remember I was in Ukraine at the beginning of July. And that was the last time I came in through Dublin Airport. And you get off the plane, you deplane, you get off the Ryanair plane, you come down the steps, you adjust yourself to how freezing cold Ireland is compared to wherever it is you've been. You shudder a little bit, you run out of the rain, and then you go into that long walk that is from where the Ryanair planes land to where passport control is. That is, depending on whether the travelator things are working or not, up to half an hour of a distance, and then eventually somebody asks you for your passport. So I don't know what exactly Ryanair are supposed to do with somebody who gets off the plane with a passport and arrives at passport control without one. I don't know what Ryanair is supposed to do. I don't know why we're finding them, but we're finding them anyway, because it gives the government, I think, am I right? Am I being too cynical? It just gives the government somebody else to blame so they can pin that problem on somebody else ahead of the election.
It's designed to look like something is being done. We're moving swiftly on from the fact that you were told that you were not being truthful not so long ago if you said that people were arriving in Dublin with no airports. That was poo-pooed as not really being real. That it wasn't a big problem. And now we have what I would describe as a fake solution to that. So now we're going to find the airlines. So what are the airlines going to do? Send an air hostess to hold your hand all the way to passport control? Like, what can they do? I mean, I suppose that the Dublin airport could put security onto the plane and not let people deplane until they show them their passport. I don't know. But it's not really, it's again kind of skirting around the edges of the problem, making it look like you're doing something when you're not really addressing the main problem, which is that we are deporting less is it 1% or less of people who are rejected for asylum here? We don't have a good system. It's a mess. And they know that it's a hot topic with the public to a point, so they're trying to throw out a few scraps to the public in advance of an election to make it look like they're doing something. And some people will buy it, but I don't.
Well, there's also the fact that the media are cooperating with them here in a massive way. I mean, clearly, you only have to read Fintan O'Toole in the Irish Times this week, who's getting out with Elon Musk, and a lot of other senior journalists are absolutely terrified to their core that the voters might do something silly in an election. Now, I think they have no reason to be worried, personally, but so the media are quite obviously cooperating with the government on advancing particular messages. So we had this story this week. I don't know if you saw it because you're overseas, where the government increased deportations last year. I think, and I don't the exact numbers are on Gript.ie if somebody wants to find them. But let's say, for argument's sake, it went from 5 to 15. The numbers involved were very small. And the Irish Times ran a banner headline along the lines of "Deportations up 300% in a year as government cracks down on illegal migration." You're just like, you saw it? You saw it?
Yeah.
So, you guys do not get to lecture the rest of us about misinformation and fake news and creating narratives when you are laundering the government's political messages to the public for them in the most friendly possible way to the government. If the government's got a political message, I think it's fair to report that. It's fair to say ministers are pointing to a 300% increase in deportations as evidence that their migration policy is working. Next sentence, deportations went from 5 to 15 last year out of a total of 1,000 people with deportation orders. Let the public decide. But actually laundering the message is just incredible. I think the same thing has been done with this airline story. Where there's a concerted effort to make low information voters believe that actually this is Michael O'Leary's fault that these people are coming in without passports. And it's amazing to sit and watch it happen in real time and understand that loads of people at home listening to the reports on the radio, on the television, will be taking it on board or not listening really in any depth, and they'll just stick in the back of their mind, oh, something's being done about that, which is all that the government is trying to achieve here. It's bananas, really, isn't it? I don't know.
Yes.
Do you know, it'd actually make you excited for the Sky News story about Molly May Hague and Tommy Fury breaking up, wouldn't it?
So do you even know who these people are?
Yes, I do. I watched about 2019, it was the summer. It was a relatively slow summer, if you remember. There wasn't much on in 2019. It was there were no major world events that really happened in 2019. I don't know if people remember that or not. And I was having a quiet summer, and I started watching Love Island, and I loved it.
But so did I.
I loved it.
So did I.
Thought it was brilliant. Yeah.
But weirdly, never since have I watched it. So it was just that summer. I feel like a lot of people watched it that summer. Was it just particularly good, or there was nothing else? I don't know. Or was it COVID? No, it was pre-COVID. So I don't know what it was, but I watched it. And other people, I'll sometimes see in pop culture, people talk about people from Love Island, and I won't have a clue who they are. Never. But that one I watched.
I think, in fairness, was it the subsequent year where the Irish one was on? I can't remember her name, but she was from the west of Ireland or something, and then she said a few sexually explicit things on the television, and she became briefly alleged. Was that the same one? Was it?
Yeah,
okay.
Same one.
Well, then I only watched one. Yeah, I only watched one.
Maura.
Then she became a star for a while because she said things about sex on television in the west of Ireland accent, which automatically made her a legend. So I watched that one. So I know who Molly May Hague and Tommy Fury is, but I hadn't thought of them for about maybe 3 years, to be honest, until I saw this story breaking as if it was the end of the world. And they gave it the same treatment in Sky News that they would have given Joe Biden has died. I'm serious. That was the level of breaking news they gave it. I think there was a reporter actually on scene outside the couple's house at one point. Anyway, what were your thoughts on the story?
They have a small child, so it's very sad. I think it's, I feel very sorry for her. I think she's always struck me as a kind of a nice person. And I think that she seems very, from the stuff I saw, seems absolutely devastated. And, like I said, they have a small child, so this is a family breaking up. But it shows that ugly side of celebrity where it seems to me from, I saw an article that published her post that she put up on Instagram about it. And reading between the lines, it seemed very much like it was down to some behaviours by him. And it just kind of shows.
You would say he went off with another one, is basically what you're saying that the Instagram post implied. Because I saw loads of tweets, we're all taking that interpretation. Whether it's true or not, we don't know, but that's the widely shared interpretation, I think, of the Instagram post, at least by women, that he must have stepped a foot or more than a foot out of bounds.
Yeah, and that. Yeah, so I think that it's very sad for her. It's very like a public humiliation, and it's kind of strikes me as, people who get really famous, they kind of the relationship almost becomes their career, if you get me. And maybe they were together longer because it was financially good for them, and maybe they stayed together longer after they had a child than they should have, or whatever. But it just reminds me a little bit of, do you remember years ago in X Factor that like every few years there'd be some guy who was kind of married with kids, but he had this talent, and maybe he had, let's pretend he worked in, I don't know, he's a carpenter, but he's got an amazing voice, and he comes out and he's quite handsome, and he comes on stage and the crowd go mad for him. And I always think on multiple occasions it would flick to his wife, who might not be quite as good looking as him, whatever. And I used to look at her and just go, oh God, you're in so much trouble. You are in so much trouble. And they would always break up. Always. Because the guy would get famous, women would be around, and like this other life. And I think that a lot of those Love Island couples or whatever, like the amount of promotions and money that comes their way, like is really shocking. Particularly Molly May. I think she was one of the biggest earners. And I know he's a boxer or whatever, but he wouldn't have been famous or have anywhere near the money if he hadn't been with her. And so maybe, I don't know. I'm sure we'll hear more about this as it goes on, but it seems to me that they're young people and it was a bit too much too soon. But it's terrible when there's a child involved.
It is, but I think these tragedies play out every single day right across society, at all levels, whether you're famous, whether you're poor, whether you're ugly, whether you're good looking. It's just that some people have to do it in the public eye, and I think that's probably the price you pay for celebrity, because you do everything else in the public eye. If you don't make your relationship into news, then the breaking up of that relationship becomes news. I think, in fairness, one thing we do well in Ireland, as opposed to in the UK, is that by and large, we let people have private lives that are private. I can't really think, and I'm sure somebody in the comments will point out somebody who is the exception to this rule, but I can't really think of even Irish celebrities whose love lives regularly make the Irish tabloids. Maybe that girl from the other podcast, what you call her? She used to be in Fade Street. Maybe her love life with that guy from Made in Chelsea makes the news, but it's very rare, and I think we do that well here in this country, is that we don't, by and large, make people's personal lives into a public soap opera. And I hope we keep doing that. I don't think there's any reason not to. Somebody else's life who's become a public soap opera in the last week, though, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this, was poor old Raygun.
Raygun.
I think she's an inspiration. Can I just say, before you say a thing, I think she's a damn inspiration. I think you and I should take up breaking and enter as a kind of a team effort for the Los Angeles 28 games. I think we could get more points.
You just said take up breaking. She's broken, all right. Is it not called breakdancing?
Breakdancing, the Olympic sport is called breaking, although actually somebody is just telling me that, it's actually, they've removed it from the Olympics for 2028. It's not going to be back. So unfortunately, there goes that plan.
We hardly knew ye. Here's what I think. I think that the online abuse is a bit excessive. All God's children and all of that. So there's a lot of cruelty and it's going a bit far. However, I will say that to me, from some of the reading about the background to this that I've done, is that I think what she's accidentally, pardon the pun, tumbled into is that she's become a kind of a symbol
Love
of.
puns, Paul.
I know. She does not have a talent for dancing, right? She is doing a PhD in dance. I read excerpts from her PhD. It's all nonsense. And she's become a kind of a symbol of a type of person who is entitled, dramatically overestimates their own talents, and is, doing, I've said before on the podcast, like, I'm kind of this culture of education across the Western world of people, I'm studying the vagina monologues through interpretive dance. Well, what's that going to do? Like, what's that for? Who's that for? Your own bullshit story about yourself and how much better you are than everybody else. That's what that's for. Be a carpenter, for God's sake. So I think that she stumbled in, like, I read a thing today that said that apparently her husband was on one of the judging panels, that she got this. I've watched videos of other people who attempted to enter and she beat off to be the representative, and they were far more talented. So I do feel sorry for her, because I think that the online abuse is excessive, but I also think that she's become a symbol of something which is a kind of a spoiled, entitled, Western person who thinks that they're somehow entitled or better than other people, even in domains where they have absolutely no business being.
I don't know. I think you might be being, and I got in trouble for saying it this week. I think it's all a little harsh. I mean, do you remember? You probably don't, because I actually don't remember him. But are you familiar with the story of Eddie the Eagle? This is the guy who went to an Olympics, I think in the 1970s. He was entered into the swimming events, and like, it turned out that like he could swim about as well as you or I could, and he got in and he swam along, and he was still on his first leg of the pool when everyone else was on their seventh, that kind of thing. Called him Eddie the Eagle because he was very proud of representing his country and everything, and he is fondly remembered. I mean, we have a whole movie about the Jamaican bobsleigh team, which cool runnings, which people should watch. I saw it. The first day I saw it, I kind of thought, that's very funny. And in a genuinely kind of like, that's funny way, that I didn't feel angry at this woman. What I don't understand is the anger people feel at her. I mean, it's a ridiculous sport. It shouldn't be in the Olympics. Like, you're crawling around on the floor to some music is not a sport. It's a thing you do in the nightclub. And where if you're bad at dancing, by the way, all good at dancing, you get your rewards in the nightclub. Or at a concert, or wherever you do it. It's not an Olympic sport. Shouldn't be an Olympic sport. So some of this anger that people have of, she stole somebody else's place, etc., etc. I mean, tough luck.
But she did.
You know what?
But she did.
Yeah, but like, you know what? Well, there may have been better bet.
But this is what I'm saying. I think that she's stumbled into something here, which is that people are aware that there is, because of all of our different rules now about, some person's sad story being more important than others, and equality of opportunity or equality of outcome trumping equality of opportunity and all this, that there is a feeling out there that there is a lot of unfairness at play in the way jobs, roles, different things are being put. And this is a great example of somebody, because it's so in your face, it's so clear. This is a perfect example of where somebody's connection to whoever was being decided, nonsense story that they were writing about their feelings about dance, whatever, has beat off more talented people just because of who they were or what they were saying, or that they were saying or doing the right things. I think that's where the anger is coming from. The anger is coming from that we live in a world now that's becoming less and less fair and not based on talent. And here you see it. 0 points. 0 points. John, I reckon I've been on enough nights out with you. I reckon you could get 5 points.
But that's the very point I was going to make. 0 points. I think the whole 0 points thing was ridiculous. I didn't watch. I'm saying this. I mean, maybe it was 100 times worse than the 30-second clip I saw. Maybe it really was worthy of 0 points. I'll allow that possibility. But I watched a lot of the Olympic gymnastics. Now, I'll stipulate I couldn't do half of what any of these people do. But there were people like attempting the high bar, falling off 3 times in the routine and getting like 9. Good scores, obviously 16, 17, but they're getting 9, 10. There are people in the diving who literally, I mean, I watched the Olympic diving, and one of the things I discovered with the Olympic diving is the whole aim is to make as little of a splash as possible. People going in and like, it was like you throw an elephant in and they were getting 5-6 points. So this woman getting no points at all, I mean, I thought that was a little bit much. I thought it was a little bit that maybe the judges are making a point, whatever was happening, but I thought it was a little bit much. It was almost like it was being played up for comedic purposes by all involved.
No, I think it's
You
back
obviously
to
think that
the
0 points was warranted.
yeah, because you're not a dancer. And people work really hard in their prospective fields and train and, you know, give up, make sacrifices in their life and miss things and get up early and, you know, whatever. You're not a dancer. Why are you trying to be a dancer? I'm not trying to be a gymnast. Do you know what I mean? It's not, it's that you have such lack of concern for other people's craft, for other people's work. I don't know anything about dancing, but you just don't care. And it's part of a whole, it's part of a whole problem I have with the world, politics, which is you will have people all the time row in with opinions about things, political or otherwise, that are absolutely unqualified to make those, to have those opinions or to make statements, say on Twitter. And they think that their opinion on, you know, the evolution of whatever, cell reproduction is just as important. Virology. They think their opinion on virology is exactly as valuable and important as the guy who spent 10 years studying it, because that's the world we live in today. And this gobshite thinks that her PhD in nonsense is as makes her her dancing as valuable as the person who's gone to dance school and trained and worked towards this. And it's just garbage, John. It's garbage, and it should be called out as such. And I think 0 points does that.
Yeah. Ryan Nugent. People might have forgotten about Ryan Nugent. Do you remember he used to commentate sports when we were young? He's now the head of RT Sport. He was giving out this week about citizen journalists using not dissimilar language to the language you're using there, where he was like, you know, you don't get citizen architects, you don't get citizen engineers, you don't get citizen surgeons, but why are we taking citizen journalists seriously? And I was thinking, yeah, on one level he has a point. Your point about virologist is well made. On the other hand, like, you know, comparing a journalist to a surgeon is a lot. And I also think comparing a breakdancer to a gymnast is a lot, you know? So I don't know if I agree with you on this one, but we don't have to agree on everything. It's not mandatory.
Yeah, well, but the citizen journalist point is not the same thing, because if we, you know, a lot of people, you know, as they say, sometimes the man makes the moment and sometimes the moment makes the man. And when it comes to citizen journalism in Ireland, the moment is very much making the man, because we don't have enough investigative journalism or even just basic journalism. So a lot of the citizen journalism that's emerging is emerging out of a want and need, and not because people think they're better, but just because we're not getting enough news, we're not getting the truth. As you say, they're laundering the government stories for them. So some of that is that. It's not the same as a surgeon. But I just think, to go back to the point, dancing around like a fool and everyone's supposed to clap you. No, I'm not.
All right. Well, look, we'll leave it there. I think one of the things that, if I had a closing thought, is that what we don't have enough of in this country is the drawing of lines between stories, actual painting a picture. That all the stories we've discussed today, with the possible exception of Molly May and Tommy, God love them, have been in some way connected. You know, it's all part of a pattern of how we do business in this society, and we don't have those high level enough conversations. I mean, the journalists silo everything away as one single issue at a time, and I think that's the problem with a lot of reporting. Anyway, you've got ages left in your holidays. I'm so jealous, but you'll still be there next week, and we'll be back here, won't we? Good. All right. Well, listen, from Sarah and from me to you, the people who have been listening and watching us this week, thanks so much for your time as ever. Enjoy what we hope will be a less unpleasant weekend than usual weather-wise, and we will see you back here next week for another edition of The Week That Really Was. Take care.